In a far distant future, where technology powers almost every aspect of life, a woman named Ash, a female worker at one of the world's leading companies, drives home to her husband. He's a mechanic who stays at home to take care of cars while she works at a tech company called Cobalt. They appear to be very much in love, as they can't take their eyes off each other. While they discuss work and the day's events, Ash lightly teases Gray about being a stay-at-home husband. Gray decides to reveal more about the high-profile nature of his work, and he asks his wife to join him on a drive where he plans to introduce her to one of his clients. As it turns out, this client happens to be a wealthy tech billionaire who is also one of her heroes. While on the way, Gray warns his wife that his client is a bit strange, but just his house alone will make the trip worthwhile. They eventually arrive at what looks like two huge rocks, and Ash playfully asks if this was the house that Gray wanted to show her. To her surprise, he reveals that this is nothing but a secret entrance that leads to an even more absurd facility. They find their way down to Aaron Keen's secret lair, who not only happens to be Gray's client, but also one of Ash's largest clients as well. Furthermore, he is one of the wealthiest people on the planet, sitting as the owner of one of the largest tech companies of all time. Ash eagerly introduces herself to him while sharing her thoughts on how her company hoped to catch up to his in the long run. Being a brilliant genius has its drawbacks, as Aaron is socially awkward and isn't very good at conversation. He makes a comment that no other company would ever be able to catch up to his work, and he wants to show them why. He decides to show them his latest invention, a computer device called STEM. STEM is an artificial intelligence unit that is more advanced than anything ever created. He explains to them that it can do anything a person wants, but Gray is skeptical about this as he believes all AI have limitations. Their meeting ends on an awkward note as Ash tries to ease the tension, while Aaron appears to be annoyed that Gray doesn't appreciate his life's work. On the way back home, Gray and Ash ride in an AI-powered car that was hired for them, while sharing their thoughts on technology. While most people in this new age prefer having AI at their beck and call, Gray prefers to get his hands dirty and be the one in charge. His wife laughs at his antics and asks him what he plans to do in the next few years when AI takes over his job, and Gray admits that he would just have to get used to it. Smiling, his wife suggests that he should just sit back and enjoy the ride. They start to get affectionate in the car, but unknown to them, the car is driving them in the wrong direction, passing through Gray's old neighborhood. In the throes of passion, Gray's eyes pop open, and he notes that the car isn't taking them anywhere near their destination. Gray instructs the car to take them home, and even tries telling it their location. Thinking it was just a simple software bug, they start yelling at it to bring them to where they want. Eventually realizing that something is amiss beyond just a simple software bug, the two of them begin to panic. The car then rams straight into a group of other cars, which results in a massive collision. Thankfully, the two of them survive relatively uninjured. Unfortunately, a group of men then begin to approach their vehicle while the rest of the neighborhood residents hide. While there are no police around, various drones circle the sky and observe the wreckage. Unfortunately, they are very far away and aren't able to record clear and accurate footage of the wreck. While on camera, the men drag the couple out from the wreckage of their car and begin to abuse them. Gray is kicked in the stomach and told to watch, while the leader of the gangsters, a man named Fink, shoots and kills his wife in front of him. Gray cries out in agony, but is brutally beaten by Fink's men until they shoot him in the back. Gray begs for his wife not to leave him as he lay on the ground, telling her he is unable to move. He reaches for his wife, who then dies in front of him. Years later, we see Gray in a hospital facility where he has been undergoing rehabilitation and now sits in a wheelchair. He is unable to move anything from the neck down, and his eyes contain no life. When his AI assistant offers him a green drink, he initially hesitates, but allows the AI to do what it can. Later, his mother Pamela comes by to check on him at the hospital. She stays for quite some time until Detective Cortez comes for a visit to talk about the criminals that put him there. She promises him that she is going to work to catch the criminals, but Gray flares up and becomes angry at how useless the police were. If they had been able to arrive sooner, his wife would still be alive, and the murderers wouldn't have escaped. To make matters worse, the drone footage was completely useless due to poor quality, and the criminals wearing masks. Later on, Gray suddenly receives a surprise visitor from Aaron. After some initial awkward conversation, Aaron reveals to Gray that he has a solution which would allow Gray to walk again. He wouldn't be allowed to tell anyone about it, including his friends and family. All he would have to do is let him install the AI invention, STEM, into his neck. STEM would then fix the spinal cord issues in him that keep him bound to the wheelchair. In response, Gray shouts him out of the room. He has always hated artificial intelligence and believes it to be the cause of his wife's death. As Aaron walks out of the room, he turns back and asks Gray to think about it and think of what his dead wife would want for him. After some contemplation, Gray realizes that he really has no other option. He decides to go along with the procedure because being stuck to the wheelchair would lead him to eventual suicide. He also knows that this is not the kind of life his wife would have wanted for him. Gray even signs a non-disclosure agreement to make sure he won't tell anyone about STEM after the procedure. After Aaron and his assistants carry out the surgery, Gray is stunned when he wakes up and realizes he can once again move his arms and legs. He goes back home, but knows he cannot tell anyone about his new abilities, including his mother. One day, while Gray is at home, he suddenly hears a voice speak to him in his head. It wants to know if it has permission to tell him something it noticed, while Gray was observing footage from the night of his wife's murder. Thinking at first he is going crazy, he slowly realizes that it is the voice of the AI chip in his spine. Curiosity overwhelming him, he lets STEM tell him what he wanted to say. To his surprise, STEM tells him to play the video again, where he then uncovers a key clue from the murder case. The murderer who shot his wife used a firearm implant in his arm, an extremely high-tech piece of equipment that narrows down the suspect list considerably. He also manages to identify one of the murderers and immediately wants to pursue justice. He picks up the phone and immediately calls the police, but STEM reminds him that the video footage alone isn't enough to arrest them. Not wanting to just sit back and let them go, Gray decides to go straight to his house by locating his address through a unique tattoo that STEM locates on his wrist. Compiling more detail, he realizes it is the house of a man named Cirque. Without wasting any time, Gray breaks into Cirque's house to look for evidence. STEM tells Gray to read the messages on Cirque's computer table as he might be able to find clues. They notice several references to a bar called Old Dog, found in Gray's neighborhood. Suddenly, Cirque returns to the house. Even though Gray tries to hide, Cirque notices him almost immediately and attacks him. Gray tries to fight him off, but Cirque is ex-military and easily overpowers him. The whole time, STEM is trying to give advice on how to fight back. Realizing that he is going to get killed, Gray then gives STEM permission to take over his body to defend himself from the murderer. With STEM in control, Gray instantly overpowers Cirque in a mind-bending display of skill. Cirque tries grabbing a knife to put Gray down permanently, but is quickly disarmed and killed in an absolutely grisly death. As soon as the man is killed, STEM then gives back full control to Gray to deal with the brutalized corpse. Realizing what he had just done, he vomits in the sink and begins to panic. Being an emotionless AI, STEM then instructs him how to clean up after themselves and leave no clues. Later, Aaron meets with Gray to keep an eye on STEM and ask how things are going. Gray is annoyed that Aaron didn't mention that STEM was able to speak, but this seems to surprise Aaron as he didn't know that either. He then reveals that he is able to track their location through STEM, and he is aware that he went and killed Cirque. He promises not to tell anyone because Cirque was a murderer, but reminds him that STEM is a multi-billion-dollar artificial intelligence chip, and that he can't just let Gray run around killing people with it. After Cirque's body is checked out at the morgue, Cortez notices in some recorded camera footage that Gray happened to be nearby the murder scene in his wheelchair. When she goes to see him to ask what he was doing, Gray, who is now back in his wheelchair, makes up a story. He knows that being in a wheelchair is all the excuse he needs to get him out of any trouble. Later, while still in his wheelchair, Gray goes to the bar Old Dog. After rolling into the bar, he loudly asks everyone in the bar to step forward if they know anything about the murder of his wife. While everyone shakes their head at the ridiculous request, a man named Tolan steps forward and admits that he was there. He then wheels Gray into a back room and tries to torture him, thinking that the wheelchair is fake. The whole time this is happening, Gray just wants him to admit that he really was involved in his wife's murder. Once he finally does, he lets Stem take control, where he immediately flings into action and beats down the entire room of people. Stem then informs him that he knows how to make Tolan give up information on the rest of the gang. Without looking, Stem then begins to violently slice up Tolan's face until he breaks. It is so gruesome, Gray can't even watch, and all we hear are vicious knife sounds. Eventually, Tolan snaps and gives up the name Fisk. Stem then tells Gray that Aaron is trying to manually turn him off. He must have been monitoring their location and figured out what they were doing. If that happens, Gray would be paralyzed again and unable to move. It is also highly likely that Aaron would remove Stem from his neck and leave him back in a wheelchair. Their only option is to find a computer hacker who can override Aaron. Luckily, Stem locates one nearby, and he barely manages to make it there in time. A few hours after Gray leaves, Fisk goes to the bar and finds Tolan's body. Through a camera in Tolan's eye, he can see Gray repeating the address Stem gave him. Clearly, Fisk too has some degree of cybernetic enhancements. Angry about the death of his friend, Fisk shouts at the bartender for being so useless. When the bartender pulls out a gun, Fisk just sneezes at him. Without realizing it, tiny microbots fly up the bartender's nose and quickly kill him from the inside. Meanwhile, Gray is under the care of the computer hacker named Jamie. She is able to turn him back on by using a code that Stem told Gray to write on his arm. Unfortunately, it seems that Fisk has also caught up to them and brought one of his friends named Jeffries. When Jamie notices them on the security camera, she flees before Stem has fully turned back on. While struggling, Gray does manage to escape the two of them in a chase. While in the process of escaping, Gray uses his advanced Stem to engage in hand-to-hand combat with Jeffries. With the help of his AI, he manages to outmaneuver him and shoot him in the head. Fisk notices this and slowly begins to realize who he is facing. When Gray goes back to his home, he doesn't realize that his mother is there, and she notices that he's able to walk again. He tells her the truth, but she needs to keep it a secret from others. It is at this moment that Cortez then shows up at the house, after having noticed that Gray's wheelchair was also on the scene of the murders at the bar. The coincidence is too large to ignore, but Gray manages to make up another story about how someone stole his wheelchair and beat him up. When Cortez leaves, Gray immediately leaves to find Fisk. Unfortunately for him, he realizes that Cortez was following him in her car. Stem points out that she bugged him when she touched his jacket, and if they are caught, everything is over. With the help of Stem, Gray is able to lose her when he causes her to get into a car crash. Gray then goes to Fisk's house to end things once and for all. To his shock, Fisk reveals that the murder of his wife and his paralysis were a paid job, and that he was hired by someone to do it. Although his wife was killed, the real job was to make sure he was paralyzed. In his anger, the two of them battle it out, only for Stem to point out that Fisk also has an AI that seems superior to his own. Realizing that he is outmatched, Gray taunts Fisk when he realizes that one of the people he killed was Fisk's brother. Using his emotion against him, Gray causes Fisk to lash out and kills him in the process for being sloppy. When he takes Fisk's phone, he hears a message from Aaron, as he realizes the whole thing was set up by him from the start. Realizing that it was all a setup so that he could test Stem on a live human, Gray shows up at Aaron's lab to kill him. Surprisingly, Cortez also shows up and demands Gray drop the gun. Unfortunately, after the hacker Jamie made some changes to the software, Stem has equal control over Gray's body. While the two of them battle for control, Gray appears to be losing. In a shocking twist, it is then revealed that it wasn't Aaron who came up with this plan, but it was Stem. After creating the most powerful AI on the planet, Stem quickly took control of Aaron's company and has been running the show for years. The next step in his evolution would be for STEM to get implanted in a human, giving him a body of his own. Gray thinks back on everything that happened and realizes that STEM had been coercing him to follow his wishes all along. STEM then aims his gun at Cortez, ready to shoot her, but Gray struggles for control of his body. He stabs himself in the hand to seize back control, but it does little to stop anything. Eventually, he points the gun to his own head, where he shouts at STEM that nobody is in control of his body but himself. He then pulls the trigger. Suddenly, Gray wakes up in a hospital bed. His wife is with him, and she explains that he had been in a coma. He can't believe what he is hearing and grabs hold of his wife in shock, happy for the first time in years. Unfortunately, we pan back to reality, where we realize STEM has successfully taken control of Gray's body. When Cortez asks where Gray is, STEM explains that he is happy, stuck in his own mind, living in a better place. He then points the gun at her and emotionlessly shoots Cortez dead. STEM then tastes the blood on his fingers with great curiosity and walks out of the building with a new body. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out when you do that. And of course, check out the other videos if you like watching recaps.